Hi, I'm James.
And I'm Anthony.
And this is Words and Numbers.
What's new and exciting in your world?
Well, it's in our world. James and I will be taping a live episode of Words and Numbers at Truman State University in Kirksville, Missouri. If any of you are around there on December 9th, we start up at 4:30 p.m. It's open to the public. It's at Baldwin Hall, Truman State University.
I'm guessing that we've got, 3, maybe 4 people who live near there?
I don't know. It's the oddest thing. Every time we say that we're going to be in some town, a bunch of people who I never knew lived near there come in and say, we'll take you out for burgers.
It would be nice if somebody showed up. And if you do, come and introduce yourself. It's always nice when somebody finds us on the road.
Our topic at Truman State is going to be trade-offs, which got me thinking about my current batch of statistics students. You ever notice you'll get child prodigies in mathematics and music, but you never get a child prodigy in statistics? I submit that to understand statistics, one has to understand gradations. In statistics, there's not true or false or black and white or up and down. It's always gradations of the two extremes. It's both and neither. That kind of thinking is foreign to young people. Particularly high school students tend to be very idealistic. They don't see the compromises as readily. And so consequently, it turns out that younger people tend not to be well prepared to study statistics, not for any intellectual reason, but simply out of a lack of life experience, of understanding that often the answer is both and, not either or. What this boils down to is that typically when I get a batch of introductory statistics students, they tend to be sophomores, which is probably at the lower end of what you want in terms of youth. As with wines, some years students are particularly good, other years they aren't. But this year's students seem particularly, how should I say, not well prepared. It's not an intellectual thing. It just seems to be they're not interested in learning statistics. They're not getting it. There's some serious disconnect going on here. And so I just figured, well, it's me. It's something I'm doing different than I've done before. So I talked to other statistics professors at other universities, and they're all saying the same thing. It's something about this batch of students. They just can't seem to get their heads around statistics. And suddenly it dawned on me. This is the COVID batch. These are the students who were seniors in high school when COVID started. Their freshman year of college was online. And here they are sitting in my classroom as sophomores. But in terms of experience, they're really freshmen.
They might even be high school seniors.
Possibly so. And this comes back to this idea of trade-offs. We chose to lock down our schools and make the students go remote for all sorts of reasons. But everything comes with a trade-off. And it appears that one of the trade-offs that is coming to the fore is that our students have lost, at least in some ways, a year's worth of education. I don't know what the answer to all of this is, other than this will be interesting to see if this batch of students catches up eventually, or if this is something that will be plaguing us for decades, that there's a group of people who just are a year behind consistently.
I don't know if it'll be with us for decades, but it might be with us for 8 years as we finally get people aging out, presuming, of course, that we get to the point where we can go out of doors again. They're already talking about re-lockdowns. Anyway, I have something that is so important to the people I live with that I have to share it here. The people I live with won't hear it because not a one of my children or the wife listens to anything I do. This includes this podcast or things I might say at the dinner table.
Things you say live.
Yeah, anything at all that I say tends to escape their attention. I want to talk about maple syrup. The Quebecois that are my in-law family, a lot of them are in the maple syrup business. All of a sudden this year, the syrup producers could not produce enough to satisfy demand.
Really?
And you don't think about these things because most people think that Drek from Aunt Jemima is actually maple syrup. It isn't. Maple syrup is actually a high-end liquid. It's going to cost you. But Quebec produces about 70% of the world's maple syrup. It's all coming from the same place, but they weren't able this year to keep up with demand, which is worldwide demand. Most of it comes from the U.S., but demand is in fact worldwide, which jumped 21% for some reason last year. We might well be looking at a COVID thing here too. If you're stuck at home day in, day out, maybe you want something to treat yourself with, like real maple syrup.
Yeah, pancakes are comfort food.
They really are. Waffles not far behind.
Yeah.
So here it is. But come to find out, all was not lost for the good people who do the maple syrup for the rest of us, because, wait for it, they keep a strategic reserve
for just such emergencies.
for when this nonsense happens. So they had a bad year, and weather was bad for growing. Weather has to happen very specific way for maple syrup to result from the trees. And the weather was just horrific this year, and everybody took a hit. But they have the strategic reserve to send out, and nothing gets lost. When a group of producers decides to implement their own insurance plan, their own insurance strategy, boy, good things start to happen. Think about the coordination that had to exist for all of these producers to buy into the idea of a strategic reserve. And then, here's the hard part, sending a bunch of their very valuable liquid over to someone to hold in case they needed it some other time.
This is not a government program. This is the industry itself got together and said, we need to do this.
And that was the most fascinating part for me. It's astonishing. Hats off to my good friends up in Quebec. That's, of course, time for the foolishness of the week. This week, we've got a foolishness that is just emblematic of what I take to be two very different issues. And both brought about by a young man, 26, I believe he was, who was found in the landing gear as a stowaway from Guatemala to Miami.
I saw the headline, but I didn't read what happened to him.
This guy, well, he's been collected by the authorities, of course.
He's alive.
But
that's astounding.
He is very much alive now. He looked somewhat worse for the wear.
Yeah.
But right off the bat, my mind goes to immigration. If there were some sort of functioning legal way he could have gotten to the U.S., this never would have happened.
Yeah.
If he thought he had any hope at all getting to the U.S. with our immigration policy, he'd have done that.
Right.
How do I know that? Well, I know that because nobody wants to stow away in the wheel of an airplane.
More than that, you don't see people stowing away in wheels of airplanes between Connecticut and Texas, for example.
No, you do not. And think about the discomfort that would be involved here. I mean, the air pressure is going to be dreadful. The temperature is going to be near lethal. I really feel for this guy. And, you look at the desperation that leads to things like this. You should be thinking, let's maybe look at a better way of doing things. Now, a lot of the people dig in their heels and they say, well, we have laws. They need to follow laws. Those people don't know what the laws are. If they did, they would understand that they themselves could not get into the United States if they were born somewhere else.
Right.
It's almost impossible. But I think our thoughts should go somewhere else, too, because if that guy could get into the wheel well of a plane, so could any terrorist who wants to. And I'm pretty sure that terrorists could bring down airplanes like this at will. So I get a little nervous when I think about airport security in this case, Guatemala, but in any number of other places, too. I don't know how people manage to get onto planes, but they do manage. But I know that every terrorist in the world saw this news story and is thinking very hard about how to capitalize on it.
To get more Ant and James, buy a copy of our excellent book, Cooperation and Coercion. You can find the paper and electronic versions on Amazon and the audio version on Audible. There's been a tremendous amount of talk about wealth and wealth taxes, and much of it is conflating wealth and income, and then you throw in things like unrealized capital gains. There's a huge mess of words that people are using.
I think this kind of mirrors the problem we have when we talk about debt and the deficit.
Yeah.
That one leads to another, but they're not the same.
It doesn't need to be that difficult. Very simply, the way I describe it to my students is picture a bathtub. The water flowing in through the spigot, that's income. The level of the water in the bathtub, that's wealth.
That's actually a very good analogy.
If you think of the drain as spending, then you could see what happens. If the water is coming in faster than it's draining out, the water level is going to rise.
I would lay a proviso out there. Taxes are spending. When you open up that drain to spend, taxes are included there.
From the perspective of the individual, if I've got to pay taxes, that's spending from my perspective. It's what I have to spend for government.
It's just spending on things that you don't get to take home with you.
We should take a sidestep here for a second, because people will argue, and they're correct, that, well, but I pay taxes and I get things in return. You get the roads and the bridges and the police and courts and all of this, and that's all correct. But all of that stuff is a small fraction of the total amount of taxes you pay. Most of the taxes, I think we did the math some time ago, something like 70% or more of the taxes that you pay are simply redistributed to somebody else.
I think about my septic tank out back. We moved into the house. We thought everything was great. Then it started smelling. And turns out there was a defect in the septic tank. And I had to pay some guys to come over and fix it. I gave them $5,000 to fix this god-awful mess. And at the end, all they did was pack up their tools and leave. And I said to one of them, geez, when I spend this kind of money, I usually get something for my trouble. He said, well, now you don't get something for your trouble.
Right.
And I thought, yeah, that's exactly right. But it's kind of hard to comprehend of that kind of money leaving and nothing good coming in. Well, so too taxes, right? We all pay quite a healthy amount in taxes. And for some of us, lots of that comes floating back in. And for 40% of us, it doesn't.
On top of the confusion about wealth and taxes, and we'll come back to this in a minute when we start talking about wealth taxes, there's a related confusion amongst income, realized gains, and unrealized gains.
Paging Elizabeth Warren.
Politicians particularly like this confusion because they can say words that make it sound like the rich aren't paying their fair share or whatever it is, when in fact what they're doing is messing with definitions. So let's go to the beginning. A capital gain is simply selling something for a higher price than you bought it for. So I buy a share of Amazon stock for $3,000 and later I sell it for $3,500. I've made a $500 capital gain. Another way you can describe that is you can call it a realized capital gain. That is, I actually bought the stock and I turned around and I actually sold it and I've got $500 more in my pocket than I had before. That's a realized capital gain, or you could call it income. It's also income.
I want to stress here that a realized capital gain is the only capital gain there is.
Right, yes. So people talk about unrealized capital gains, but they're really not a thing. They're a hypothetical. And by that, what I mean is...
Well, I've got a great example here, Ant.
Yeah.
I bought my house a couple of years ago, and then I refinanced a year later. And now, every month, the agency that I refinanced through, they send me a valuation report on my house. And my house is now worth 30% more than it once was.
Right.
That's an unrealized capital gain.
I'm even cringing as you say capital gain, because
Sure, me too.
It isn't a gain. You haven't sold the house.
That's right. And it's never going to be a capital gain until I sell it. And then, only maybe, I've sold 3 houses in the past and never had a capital gain on any of them.
Yeah, see, and that's the thing. Your house right now on paper is worth 30% more than you paid for it. But 10 years from now, when you actually sell it, it may not be worth 30% more than you paid for it.
And Elizabeth Warren right now is leading this charge to tax unrealized capital gains.
Yeah.
In her world, I would be on the hook for 30% of my house's value. I would have to pay tax on that. I'm not ashamed to admit I can't afford that.
When politicians talk about unrealized capital gains, many people picture that somebody, some rich person, has received money and now should pay tax on it. That's not the case. If it's unrealized, you haven't received money on it. All that's happened is, on paper, the thing is worth more.
And nobody ever talks about giving me a refund if it goes down.
And that's the weird thing. Do you get a refund on the way down? And I haven't heard politicians talk about that one way or the other.
They're not interested in refunds.
So we have this business, and I put a big warning on this, that to treat unrealized capital gains as income is a marked departure from the way we do accounting, the way we do finance, the way we do economics. It's a complete redefinition of the term. This is a serious business.
It's an invitation to disaster. Think about Jeff Bezos sitting on all those shares of Amazon. He's going to get hit with an unrealized capital gains tax on all of them. The valuation that he bought them is going to be zero, and then he's going to have to sell them at market price. But the minute he starts selling them at market price, the market price of Amazon tanks.
Yes, and there's a good example of this. Just recently, Elon Musk had to sell, I forget what the number was, 6 billion sticks in my head.
I think it was 5 million.
Was that all it was?
I think so.
Or 5 million shares or $5 million?
5 million shares, I believe it was.
Okay.
I don't really pay a lot of attention to this, so keep me in mind in your hate mail when we get this
That's
wrong.
right. In my mind, it was $6 billion worth of stock. But nonetheless, what happened was Elon Musk got a tax bill. He had to sell a bunch of, what's his company? Tesla. Whatever the cause was. I think what happened is he got a tax bill and as a result had to raise money to pay it. And how do you raise the money? He's selling $6 billion or whatever the number is worth of Tesla stock. But here's the important point. If you read the news about it, it says he's going to structure the sale. That is, he'll sell some of the stock now, some of the stock next quarter, some of the stock the quarter after that. And the reason he's doing that is to prevent the Tesla stock from tanking, which is exactly what would happen if he tried to dump all those shares on the market all at once.
Yeah, and it would tank. When you tax in this particular way, you're inviting disaster. These things will not be worth what they once were. Where does that disaster manifest? Well, not with Elon Musk. He doesn't have to care. But what about all those old people in their retirement accounts that have a little bit of Tesla stock? Now it's worth less.
Right.
Grandma and grandpa were depending on this. These are regular people with stocks and bonds in their retirement accounts.
Along with politicians talking about realized and unrealized capital gains, they've been talking about taxing wealth. And there's this unfortunate bait and switch that I've seen both politicians and people in the media do. When they talk about how much the rich pay in taxes, they'll talk about how much taxes they pay as a fraction of their wealth. ProPublica had an article on this where they said that Elon Musk pays 3.3%. Now, hang on a second. Nowhere does the federal government tax wealth, it taxes income. And the number I'm assuming is correct, it seems ballpark right, to say that Elon Musk pays 3.3% of his wealth in taxes makes you think his tax rate is really low. The rest of us are paying 15%. You're mixing apples and oranges here. We don't tax wealth. What happened was someone came along and said, well, he paid a total tax of this much and he's got wealth of this. Let's divide one by the other and we get 3.3%.
That is a meaningless number. It's absolutely
meaningless. It's a meaningless number because we don't tax wealth, we tax income. Now, if you want to push it and say, okay, well, I understand you don't tax wealth, you tax income, but nonetheless, it is true that all the federal taxes he paid amounted to 3.3% of his wealth. Okay, well, you want to do that? Let's do it for everybody. You can look up numbers for the rest of taxpayers, from the poor up through the middle class and the rich, and we all pay round about 3.5% to 4% of our wealth. So it's ballpark what ProPublica is claiming Elon Musk is paying. What got us onto this topic was you and I were talking about how much the entire tax burden is for Americans. We talk a lot about the federal taxes, but suppose we threw in state and local as well and asked the question for the entire governmental apparatus, how much are we paying?
I kind of get crushed by the local taxes and the state taxes.
Yeah, the numbers here end up being kind of interesting.
Surprisingly high.
Surprisingly high and surprisingly low, depending on the state. Alaska is at the bottom at about 5%. What that means is, roughly speaking, the average Alaskan pays 5% of his income in state and local taxes. And this is everything: income taxes, property taxes, sales taxes, the whole thing. About 5% of his income. You go to the other extreme, New York State. Want to take a guess?
I live there. It's going to be a relatively informed guess. I would imagine it's probably 17, 18%.
It's 12.
It was painful. I remember writing the check.
Yeah. Now, remember, for you, it may well have been 17 or 18%. This is 12 on average. So there's going to be some people very high, some people very low.
I believe it was. I wasn't making a ton of money there either. My salary was probably about $40,000. They came looking for me real hard. And for those of you out there who are wondering about the figure I just quoted, it was so shameful that I lied about it. My wage was actually $39,000. And if you think professors make a ton of money all the time, no, they don't.
So if you put all of that together, state, local, federal, on average, of course, it varies depending where you are and how much you're earning, but on average, Americans are paying about 24% of their income in taxes, all levels of government.
And that's actually quite a lot.
Yeah, it's a decent chunk. Now, one of the things that's going on here is the numbers get skewed because of the deficit. You run a deficit, and what does that mean? The government's going to be spending a bunch of money, it's going to be borrowing to pay for. Well, if it hadn't borrowed, it would have had to have taxed us. So
Right.
what it's really doing is deferring this tax. So for example, 2021, the deficit's around $2 trillion. We got to pay that at some point. We're going to pay it down the line. We're going to push it off. So at some point in the future, we're going to have to come up with $2 trillion worth of taxes to pay for this thing. If you include the deficit in there, so think about not just the taxes we're currently paying, but also these deferred taxes in the form of deficits, we're decently north of 30%.
And people don't really think about the deficit all that much. And when they do, they conflate it with the debt. But what the deficit really is an illustration of spending. When the government spends money at this point, 1 out of every $4 is put on a credit card and kicked down the road. And I make this case a lot after hearing you make it some years back, Ant. If we shut down the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines and closed the Pentagon and got rid of the Department of Defense, literally got rid of every single thing that has anything to do with the military, we still wouldn't balance the budget.
Yeah, you'd still have a decent deficit for this year.
So when you say, and there's a lot of people out there who say, well, just lay off military spending. We can get rid of the military and it's not even going to come close.
Yep.
That's how big an issue this really is.
So what I've done here, I pulled some numbers to compare the United States to other countries. At all levels of government, you're talking 24% for the U.S., federal, state, and local. Sweden, for example, which people point to and say, look, we need to be more like Sweden. They have free healthcare. They have free college.
Free.
It's not free. It's paid via taxes instead of being paid via a bill at the end of the month. Well, Sweden's average tax rate, and this is all levels of government combined, is 43%.
Ouch.
Versus our 24%. Let me put that in perspective. The median U.S. household has an income just shy of $68,000. That difference in taxes, U.S. versus Sweden, that's equivalent of about $13,000 a year. To say something like, well, we should have the free this, the free that Sweden has, if you were the average Swede, it'd be costing you $13,000 a year more in taxes than what you're currently paying.
And look, I've been to Europe, and if you go around and you take a look at how Europeans live, both in cities and in the country, it would befuddle Americans. Americans don't want to live the way Europeans do. What do I mean by this? Their average house is probably half the size of the average American house. They have 1 car. They don't have 2 cars. Europeans live at a standard that Americans would find ridiculous, free healthcare notwithstanding.
But let's talk about the free healthcare particularly, because that's what people talk about. The numbers I've just given you are, if we were taxed in the U.S. at the same rate that people are taxed in Sweden, the average American would owe an extra $13,000 a year in taxes. Now, let's talk about healthcare. The average employee premium for healthcare, so this is employer-provided healthcare, average employee's share of that is $5,600. The average family deductible is $1,600. Put those two things together, that's $7,200, right? So here it is again in English. The average American family is spending slightly north of $7,000 a year on healthcare expenses. To have whatever it is that Sweden has is going to cost us an extra $13,000 a year. Now, Sweden's also getting free other things, free education, free college, in addition to the free healthcare. But nonetheless, what you can see is if you just look at the healthcare, Sweden's taxes aren't worth what we're currently paying.
And there's an old saying that if you really want to see how much something costs, just wait until it's free.
Till it's free, right, yeah. And you see similar things in Canada. The average tax rate is 33%. UK, it's 34%. And again, there with Canada or UK, that translates for the average American household an extra $6,000 to $7,000 a year if we were taxed at those rates.
And let's put it in terms people can understand even easier. That's $500 a month that you don't get.
Yeah.
Your paycheck does not include $500 that it does include now.
I was asked recently if there was one thing that I could explain to people about economics, what would it be? And the one thing is trade-offs. The trade-offs exist. No matter what it is you choose to do or to have, you are automatically, simultaneously choosing not to do or have something else. And
that's right.
Way too often, our politicians present to us things that they'd like us to have and ignore the trade-off.
Well, Ant, look at just the recent nonsense. This plan will cost nothing.
It does not cost nothing. It comes at a cost. If you want the free things that Sweden has, it's going to cost the average family an extra $13,000 a year. And I would love for a politician to say this. And then fine, let people decide. Let people vote on it. And if they choose for the free healthcare and the free tuition, that's fine, but do so with open eyes. Understand it's going to cost you an average of $13,000 a year.
40% of the American people don't pay anything. The earned income tax credit, what have you. And if you're going to ask the population at large, do you want to pay for this? Well, the people who don't actually pay anything are already saying yes.
And that's exactly the calculus that the politicians would hope is going on in our heads, that, well, somebody else is going to pay for this. So
that's right.
Really, when you say free, it is free. Well, it's free to me. It's not going to be free to you. You're going to pay for yours through taxes, and you're going to pay for mine through taxes. And this is the kind of thing that politicians hope that we're thinking. The problem is we run up against the laws of mathematics. U.S. billionaires, total wealth this year, this is 2021, is roughly $5 trillion, maybe a little bit more than $5 trillion. All U.S. billionaires combined.
That's wealth, not income.
That's wealth, not income. That's less than the federal government is spending this year. If you could grab all of that, you can give everybody else a bunch of free stuff for 1 year.
Sure.
That's it.
And conversely, if you want to tax their income at a higher rate, it'll never be high enough.
So I guess the moral of this story is, look, if you want to talk about wealth and income and all of this, let's be clear about what these things mean. And let's be honest about the trade-offs, that you can't get something for nothing. This free stuff particularly comes at a cost. One other thing I want to hit here while we're talking about it. There's this murmur going around. I see it in memes from time to time in people's comments that the wealthy can do something that the rest of us can't. And that is that they can borrow against their assets. And the borrowing is not taxed. So let me be clear about this. So what might happen in this scenario is Jeff Bezos wants to spend $1 billion. So what he's going to do is borrow $1 billion using his stock as collateral. And when you receive a loan like that, you don't pay income tax because it's not income, it's a loan. And so he's all of a sudden received $1 billion tax-free. And people point to that and say, look, this is the rich doing this thing, borrowing against their assets, and they're getting this money that's coming in. They don't have to pay taxes on it. You got to hang on here a second, because the rich aren't doing anything that the rest of us don't do.
That's correct.
Every time you take a loan, you're doing the same thing. When I get a mortgage or a car loan.
Yeah, that's the one. Let's talk about car loans, because you can get a car loan, and if you have fantastic credit, you can get it at 1%, 2%, 3% right now. If you have moderately good credit, it's probably going to be 5%, 6%, 8%, somewhere in there. Is that really income? Do you really think, does anybody actually think that the money you get on a car loan is income? You get the money in a loan to buy the car. You get the car so you can drive to work and make your living, and that's what they're going to charge you on. But if they're going to charge you income tax on a car loan, congratulations, nobody can afford a car loan anymore.
Now, there is tax involved here, but the tax comes in when you go out and you earn money to pay the loan back. The money that you earn gets taxed, and after the taxes, you take some of this money, you pay the loan back.
Look, and on the local level, you're paying more tax. You're paying sales tax on the car. There's no magic wand that comes here and wipes away all taxes. You're being taxed on it. When you drive it, you're going to fill it with gas that you're taxed horribly on.
Sure. And everything you just described happens for the rich the same it happens for everybody else. It's just that there are more zeros on the numbers where the rich are concerned.
That's exactly right.
And I have said before, and I want to repeat it here, I think what's going on here when you hear all of this talk about taxing wealth and the unrealized capital gains, I think what's going on is that politicians have realized that they're running out of places to raise taxes. And they're desperately looking not to raise taxes, but actually to institute new taxes that didn't exist before.
They're not just looking for new and exciting things to tax. When you look at all of the avenues that the federal government is funded by, they're shutting down. There's 5 or 6 things that the government does to get money coming in the door. And all of a sudden, 3, 4, even 5 of those things are disappearing. Foreigners don't want to fund our debt anymore.
Right. The amount of money that foreign companies and governments are loaning to the United States rises, but it doesn't rise as fast as the debt has been rising. And the Federal Reserve has been having to take up the slack, and that gives us inflation. And so politicians, I'm sure, feel kind of behind the 8 ball here.
Yep.
They've got to choose between coming up with novel taxes that didn't exist before or living with inflation because they got to rely on the Fed to print money.
And it is going to be one of those 2 things, maybe both.
Something that's worth discussing as well. People will say things like, well, maybe a 1% wealth tax or 2% wealth tax and only on the billionaires, and certainly they can afford it. And that all sounds quite reasonable.
Can I frame what you're about to talk about next?
Yeah.
On the one hand, you better think about the income tax and how it was instituted and what it turned into over time. But the second thing is the more interesting thing. Any wealth tax is unconstitutional.
Tell us a little bit about that, James.
It's probably smarter for you to talk about the income tax first, but we only got an income tax because we got a constitutional amendment. The federal government has no right to tax individuals. So they did what an honest politician would know he had to do. They proposed an income tax, and they got it. It's the 16th Amendment, 1913. Right around all the other progressive amendments to the Constitution. But because that 16th Amendment was passed, duly passed, the government can now tax our income. Our wealth, on the other hand, was not included in that amendment.
Yep.
So what would they need to tax our wealth? Another amendment, which they have exactly no chance of getting, which is why they're not talking about an amendment. They're talking about just doing it.
And this bothers me because everything you said sounds right, except there's this glaring counterexample. And the glaring counterexample is alcohol and drugs.
Yeah, no, that's right.
The Constitution did not authorize the federal government to ban alcohol or to even regulate alcohol. And so what did we do? We duly passed prohibition, a constitutional amendment that gave the federal government that power. But then the federal government went later on and started regulating and banning drugs without a constitutional amendment.
You'd be hard-pressed to see anything that the Congress does right now that's perfectly constitutional. The government we have has become an extra-constitutional government almost completely. Most of what the federal government does via legislation is not contained in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. I think that's horrifying, but we the people have to dig in our heels when it's so obvious what they're doing now. When they say something that's so ridiculous, like, we're going to tax your wealth. Well, what's going to happen? They're going to say, well, don't worry about it, regular people. We're just going after the 1%. And that's exactly how the income tax started. So tell the people about the income tax.
Politicians promised, much like they're doing with the wealth tax now, they promised it would only apply to the rich. It would only be 1 or 2%. And it was less than a decade. It was 7 years after the amendment was passed. We had the first income tax. 7 years later, the income tax rate had quadrupled, and it applied to everybody.
Not surprising. I remember, Ant, I lived in Connecticut when they were talking about implementing an income tax there. And Connecticut already had a rather high, relatively speaking, sales tax. I think it was, by the time I left, 7.5%, something like this, which at that time was considered to be highway robbery. Now you'd look at it and say, yeah, I wish I could only pay that. But they started agitating for the income tax. Why? Because it would be a more stable source of income for the government over time. You're going to make the same amount regardless of what flashpoint is happening in the economy. Their argument was, let us implement the income tax and we'll ultimately get rid of the sales tax. And people fell for it. That's just never going to happen. You're giving politicians more money. What any reasonable person would have said would be something like, well, we've got this sales tax and now we're going to have an income tax too, and they will both go up over time. And that's exactly what happened. What any rational person could have predicted is exactly what happened.
Let me go back for a moment to the apparently reasonable argument that you hear, that we're talking about billionaires, they can afford the money, we're talking about just 1 or 2% on their wealth, and we could do all the various things that we could do with it, and we have budget deficits, and this would help, and so forth. And it does sound quite reasonable. Certainly Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos can afford to pay more taxes. But here's what bothers me. It seems that there's almost a moral question here. Maybe moral is too strong of a word, but it raises the question, whose money is this anyway? Does this money belong to Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk? And by extension, does my money belong to me? Or are we simply holding it in trust until politicians decide that they need it? Because really, it's not our money, it's theirs. If you start saying things like, well, we're just going to take more of their money because we want to spend it on various things, where does that end? Because never have I heard a politician say, we've got enough money. We're actually going to give some back. We need to spend less. They never say that. They always say we want to spend more. And if we start down this road, that the money that we have actually isn't ours, we're just holding it until the government decides it wants it. Well, I know where that road ends. That road ends with everything that all of us have, from the rich down to the poor, belongs to the government.
I'd make the case that we're probably almost already there. A number of people start with the idea that all taxation is theft. Another group, probably just as big, says something like, well, some amount of taxation is quite reasonable, given the things that the Constitution specifies we must have, given what we need locally, given what we need at the state level. So we do need some tax income, but really we're way over the top. I would say that we're way over the top on all of it, primarily because we don't have a taxation problem. We have a spending problem.
Yeah.
We have figured out how to collect the taxes. Unfortunately, we collect them way too efficiently. It's too easy for the government to get them. We do have a spending problem, except none of us, the people, are doing any of that spending at all. We're looking at politicians and saying, okay, you go and spend the money the way I want you to. That's the rallying cry now on both sides of the aisle. And what are you going to get? You're going to get enhanced spending every year, no matter which party is in power, and it will lead to a position from which we can never recover.
Your views on the question, is taxation theft, I think are right on. People will say the similar thing to me, and I'm ambivalent about this. I think there are some taxes that are clearly theft. I think there are others that clearly aren't. And the ones that clearly aren't are taxes that actually go to things that people use. So the taxes that pay for the police and the courts, that pay for the bridges and the roads and the power infrastructure, whatever it is, you're getting something for those taxes. I don't see that as theft. Now, you might argue it's a forced exchange, but it's not theft. What is theft is the portion of taxes that are taken out of your pocket and just handed to somebody else. And that is well over 50% of our taxes.
This is real easy to see. All of our data in the U.S. starts at 1790 because we did a census for the first time. So from 1790 to 1928, the government spent as a fraction of the entire economy between 2 and 4%.
Yeah.
It was just that much, right? It's a straight line from 1790 to 1928. When the progressives started getting involved in 1928 and forward, so it's Herbert Hoover and beyond, everybody says this nonsense started with FDR. That's not correct. So from Hoover forward, you get this idea that the government can just tax at whatever rate it wants and spend on anything it thinks is appropriate.
Right. We go from 2 to 4% of the economy to about 25% of the economy.
And that's a meaningful difference right there.
Yeah.
Is taxation theft? Well, at that 2 to 4% level, it absolutely is not. That's designed to pay for the things that are constitutionally required of the federal government. You get to 1928, and now I've got a problem. As things tick up from there, we've got no sensible answer as to how is this constitutional.
And notice what you've just said. We're in a situation where there are no effective constitutional constraints on how much the government spends, nor is there any line in the sand drawn that says, for example, the government may collect 18% of the economy as tax revenue and no more. There's no lines in the sand anywhere. And if that's the case, the government can come and take whatever it wants.
I think we could design a system that would introduce some feedback into the mix, which is what we're not getting right now, because the federal government did a very, very smart thing. If they wanted to reach into your pocket and steal your money, that's going to cause all kinds of problems. What they ended up doing instead was they just take it out of your paycheck before you even realize you have it. Isn't that just the smartest idea? If you really wanted the government to have to be responsible to the voters, you would stop withholding. You'd have them write a check on December 31st.
Absolutely.
And the minute people saw in that kind of visceral, real way how much government cost, not only how much government cost, but how much it cost them, you would see a radically different government emerge.
You would. And while you've brought this up, let me add something related, and that's the value-added tax. People will say things like, Europe has the VAT, and when you see a price tag on a thing in a store, that's the entire price. They say, well, in the U.S., it's weird that the price says $2 and you go to the checkout counter and you owe $2.12 because of the taxes. One of the great things about not having a VAT is that every time you make a purchase, you see that tax right there.
That's right.
It's itemized.
That's exactly right.
You know what you're paying. With the VAT, it's like the withholding. The tax is incorporated into the price such that you're unaware of how much you're paying.
When an American goes to Europe and sees that everything costs roughly 35% more, that's what they're agitating for here. That's what people are saying we should do. I take a look at that sales tax when I buy something. And if I'm going to buy a car here in the great state of Arizona, that's going to cost me 8% more. 8% on a car is a lot of money. And I got to think twice about that. Then there's all kinds of other taxes that they call something else, like your registration fee, which on a new car is hundreds of dollars.
Yep.
If you could barely afford the car, trust me, you can't afford to register it. This enters into people's behaviors quite clearly. When we think about buying clothes and things that children need for school, a lot of people in a lot of states wait for some sort of tax holiday day when they can go out and buy all this stuff that they actually need without fear of being taxed to death on it. And when you start looking at all of those little things that pile up around taxation, you start to realize how fast and loose government really plays with your money. And that's all the time we've got this week on Words and Numbers. Be sure to join us next week, the week after Thanksgiving, for whatever we find interesting then. I'm sure it'll be something. I plan on having a bit of a train wreck at Thanksgiving dinner. I like to plan in my bad behavior right to the dinner. So I'll report back how that went. Until then, you can kind of keep track of us on Twitter. Handles are in the show notes. You can... I'll say it this time for the love of God. You can email us.
Yes, indeed. Email.
Podcast.
Words. He doesn't even know the email address.
Shut up. Shut up.
wordsandnumberspodcast@gmail.com.
Yeah, I get those auto-forwarded to me every time you send one, thanks to Anthony Davies. I did not volunteer for this service, and yet I get it just the same. So if you get a caustic reply or no reply, understand that those are both Anthony's fault. Oh, yeah, it was going to fly in the face of everything I just said a minute ago, but try and be nice to each other. Look how much I am taxed trying to be nice to Anthony Davies. It's almost impossible. And yet, for 48 minutes today, I managed to pull it off. I guess, Ant, I'll see you next week. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone. It's the perfect American holiday. Don't let Anthony ruin it for you. Ant, happy Thanksgiving. I'll catch you later.
See you next week, James.